Hello and welcome to Rebel Meadows, your one-stop channel for all things crafty and RC. Today we're going to be talking about the Quanum Nova and its sister product, the Cheerson CX20. We're going to be talking about, this is going to be a multi-part video series in which we're going to be talking about, in the first three, the plug and fly, where you install your own receiver. And then we're going to do one video on the ready to fly. Not much to discuss on the ready to fly, except for people who want to, who may not be familiar with the hobby. This is going to show them what to expect when they fly. And then there'll be an advanced video dealing with more advanced flight modes. The first series of videos is really going to be dealing with 3 flight modes only: the return to home, the altitude hold, as well as GPS lock. That's where it stays in position. This follows along with the recommendations from Hobby King, because the flight controller is pre-configured when you purchase it, so we don't want to mess about with that too much when you get started. As you become familiar with the product, you can go in and do some more advanced changes and play with some of it and have fun. So the very first part of this series is going to be installing the radio, and there's going to be 2 videos dealing with the PWM because they explain 2 different configurations, and I'm going to hopefully explain that in the video for people that found that a bit confusing, because basically they're the same thing, just cables turned on their side, but for those that are maybe a bit confused, we'll try to clear that up. And there'll be a video on the PPM, the pulse point modulation. So let's get started. We're going to start with the PW pulse width, and with what I call their default configuration. That is the configuration that is used with the Quanum receiver that is not in here, but if it was here, this is how it would be plugged in. I'm calling that the default. The next one in the series will be dealing with how you would do it in an aero mode or an airplane, where it says aileron, elevator. We're going to do a one-to-one connection with that. And then finally we're going to do CPPM or PPM, which is just a single cable, which is my preferred way of doing it. It's simple and easy, and it does take a bit, there's a bit of a difference, so you need to be careful with it, and you need to have a CPPM receiver. So let's get started on disassembling this this unit and look at how we're going to make this all work. Let's get going. This is a little segue to talk about the mission planner software before we actually start taking the quad apart. The first thing I did when I received the controller, I actually downloaded Mission Planner, and there'll be a link there, and plugged it in. It also installed the drivers, so it's probably better to get that done first and to confirm that you have a working quad. So the very first thing I did before I even touched it, I plugged it into the computer, downloaded the Mission Planner, and made sure that everything would connect properly before I proceeded, so I wouldn't have any questions as to whether I did something wrong in my configuration. So it's a good little test, and highly recommend that you do this as your first step as well. Now the first thing you need to do is uninstall the screws. I'm not going to show that. They're clearly displayed in the video from Hobby King. There's 3 screws in the arm and 1 on the outbound motor side. So there's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 in the outbound area. Now that we have all the screws removed, okay, including the one in the hidden port, we can now turn it over, unplug our compass from the top here, and then carefully remove the top of the cover, making sure we fish our compass wire down through the lid. We're now done with unscrewing the bottom. Inside you're going to find a couple of bundles of wire. This is the cable that we use for our compass. Now on this side, that is, it marks motors 1 to 8. There are 3 wires. 1 is for power, and 2 are servo extensions that go to the bottom of the Quantum Nova, which gives you easier access to 2 servos, as well as 3 different power sources for hooking up your video cameras, which is kind of nice and convenient. On this side, this is where your cables are for your receiver, and that's what we're going to be working on, is making sure that in this video we're going to be talking about I call it the default. This is how the Nova is wired with its controller, and we're actually just going to rewire it using the Spectrum, Turnigy, XP. It doesn't matter, any of these receivers will work. Spectrum will work. Any of the things I'm showing you today will work with any other receiver. But anyway, there's 3 wires, and we are actually going to be wiring this receiver the same way that this is wired. It'll make sense in a minute. The couple of things we should talk about first, and that is the cabling. You notice that on the back here, and I'm going to refer to this part where the servo leads are, and that is this side here. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the pinout for this flight controller. You notice that up in the upper left-hand corner, there's 2 areas, 8 pins in all that are used for the GPS and the indicator or the lights. That area we won't be touching. We'll consider that reserved. They already have the plugs in them, so there's no need to mess with this. We'll simply be looking at this orange area here, and this is where the receiver is connected to the flight controller. Now this is marked up for the PPM, which we'll be talking about in future videos. But for right now, we're not going to be looking at the PPM. We're simply going to be looking at how we install the PWM, and that is using the 3 plugs that are already plugged into the flight controller. So the one that is across all 3 rails, as we call it, we're going to plug it into the receiver across all 3 rails as well. That's what's going to provide power to the flight controller. And then the next 2 cables are simply laid on their side on the signal line, and that's going to provide the signals from the receiver to the flight controller. So this is a pretty basic installation with the 1 wire going across all 3, providing power to the flight controller, and the other 2 cables being laid on their side. That is going to provide up to 7 different signals for our project. But as you'll see in a minute, we have to map our radio because we're not sure, depending on where you put the 2 existing wires in, it's going to change it every time. So we'll have to go in and do some radio reprogramming in order to make this work. We now have the 3 wires. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about the servo lead extensions as well as this 1 power wire. What I did is I put on a voltage, and then I tested the lead for power just to confirm that this was the back line, and it was 5 volts, and so this can now be safely plugged into the receiver. And I'm using channel 8 to plug it in, making sure that my polarity is correct. Got my negatives here. Now that our power is supplied from our power distribution board, we now need to bring up the first lead here with 3 wires, and this is going to go into my number 1. This is now going to provide power through the receiver and into the flight controller. Without this lead there, this isn't working. And then I'm just going to take the next 2 leads that are coming from the receiver. This is coming from what they call the signal line. Okay, This is just along the signal components. Since we have the ground already, we do not need power and ground for any of these other connections. The only thing we need is a signal, and we're actually going to configure it in the same way. We're actually just going to put the plugs on the signal line on the receiver. So 3, 3, and the 1 that we put in for power and signal gives us a total of 7 channels. That's all we're going to need to fly this. In fact, then some. For our basic installation, we're only going to need 5. But we're going to put those on anyway. So now we have the this connected up. We have the one that would be on its aileron. That is connected with the power and the ground. And then we simply run the signals. You're going to need a programmable radio in order to make this work, because these are just in a sequence that isn't going to match up to the standard aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder. These are going to be, we're going to go into the software, and you're going to see what each of these are, and you're going to program your radio to coincide with each of the components. So the number 2 pin will have to be connected up to the elevator, and so on and so forth. In the video from Hobby King, they said that you could maybe cut these and make them match so that they're all in alignment. But that's really not much different than doing the second type of connection, which is what you would traditionally do in a plane. So that's it for wiring up the basic default configuration. We'll now look at the software and make sure that we got our, we will pre-program our radio at that point to make sure that when I push up on the throttle, that in fact that is exactly the signal that's going to the controller. So let's take a look at the software and see what we're going to do next. Okay, now that we have started our mission planner and we're connecting, hopefully you've done the previous step of installing this properly, and you've done the test. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I think it's important to have it tested before you get here, because if you're here and something's not working, it becomes very frustrating at this point, because you don't know where the error is. Is it something you plugged in? You won't know. So before you get here, hopefully you've done the test previously and you've ensured that you have connection to your flight controller. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to go up to the configuration menu for initial setup, and we want to go to mandatory hardware, and from there we want to go to the radio calibration. At this point here, this is where you will do your remapping of your radio, because a lot of these controls won't match. So when you push your throttle up, maybe your yaw will move or something else will move. So you're going to have to actually adjust your radio. And what I did is I simply went in and into my program and remapped channel 1, and I made it pitch or yaw or whatever happened on the screen. I made it work so that everything would come together. When you're done doing all that mapping, you then have to go in and calibrate, set all your sticks to midpoint, and then go into your calibration menu. And when you go into your calibration, make sure that you push all your bars. You have a little red indicator to show what your max and mins are for each of these. They should be fairly robust, but I mean, you know, there's going to be a small variation between each of these numbers. And then when you're done, just simply click when done, and that's going to save the settings. You don't have to go out and find some place to save. I also check my switches as well. So when you're done, click, and it's going to give you a little table of all your ranges for your controller. Just make sure your throttle is down before you do this, and click OK. So that's it. Everything has been remapped. Hopefully you've been successful with your radio and you've done your calibration. Now what we have to do is we have to go over and take a look at the flight modes. As we said earlier, there is only 3 flight modes in this project. This is the stability mode, return to home, and GPS locking. So you're going to go to your whatever is mapped to switch, your 5th switch, and you're going to just test it to make sure that it turns green for each of those three modes: RTL, stabilize, and loiter. Those are the only three that we want to talk about. And we will be looking at some of these more advanced features in other videos, but for now, we don't want to touch anything else other than RTL, stabilize, and loiter. That's it for this part. Okay, now that we've seen the software, let's go in and take a look at the unit. The radio is on, it's down. Let's plug this in and see what we got here. This is its general boot up sequence that it does. Lights are on. Okay, perfect. We're ready to go. This flight control configuration is done, and we're now ready to put the cover back on and do the test flight. We're not going to do the test flight now. I've checked it, but you have to go outdoors. And for those of you that may have saw the video and he was indoors and he did a test flight indoors, unless he got a GPS signal, this is not going to arm, okay? Arming it is down and towards the center on the left stick, and unless you have GPS connections, this is not going to arm indoors. So don't be concerned if you get it all configured and it's not working. Take it outdoors. The lights will tell you when it's confirmed, and then you simply just push down and to the right, and that will arm your QNAM. The motors will spin, and you're ready to take flight. So I hope you enjoyed this brief look at installing the default receiver in the QNAM Nova plug and fly from Hobby King. Now we're going to move on to the connections, which is also pulse width, but we're actually going to be using each of the configurations. We're going to be doing a one-to-one match for aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder, and the auxiliaries. This is what they say in Hobby King is the dummy-proof connections. Let's go in there, and it's also going to work with any radio. So most of your default radios are going to have this connection, this mapping profile. So we're going to actually just take advantage of a default receiver that you may have and you want to use to make this work. So thanks for joining me today, and if you like this video, please say like, and if you want more, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much, and have a great day.